Hi there, this video will help you get the most out of the Thank You Enhanced extension to Seamless Donations. My name is David Gewirtz, and let me cover what we'll learn in this video and then move on to the actual video. For those of you who are into the too long didn't read school of WordPress design, I'm going to get started with how to construct shortcodes for a thank you page, and then you can take that and be able to do everything you want. That'll take just a minute or two. After that, though, I'm going to go behind the scenes and show you how all of this stuff works so you can really understand how to set up and customize your pages, how to debug your pages, how to test your pages, and then I'll give you a full demo of test and debugging techniques. So without further ado, let's jump right into how to construct shortcodes for a thank you page. Here's the basic premise. When you start with a Seamless Donation shortcode, you just blast Seamless Donations onto any page. That generates the form that you've set up. You're all familiar with that. But if we look at how to extend it, all we're going to do in Thank You Enhanced is add an entry field parameter, where the entry field is going to be one of a series of codes that correspond to fields in your Seamless Donations form. So for example, you would have entry field first name would return and display the first name for a donor. Entry field last name would go ahead and do the same for the last name of a donor, and so on. So when you come into the Seamless Donations page and you go into the thank you page, once you've enabled Thank You Enhanced, you'll see this long list of entry field codes. So you don't have to memorize them from this presentation. It's also on the Seamless Donations Thank You Enhanced homepage, but you can cut and paste any of these codes right into the Seamless Donations entry field equal code like we've done here. And that is pretty much how to do shortcodes in Thank You Enhanced. But let's go on to how to install them in your pages, how to debug them, how to customize them, how to get the most out of them. And to do that, you need to know how a transaction is processed. And for that, we're going to dive inside Seamless Donations. Let's start with a form. A form begins with a variety of fields that you turn on and enable. Now you'll notice that there's this code underneath the form. Every time you refresh a form on a page, every time the form is shown on the page, that code changes. So that's called your session ID, and every single time there's a different code. What happens is that code is going to be tied to the entry for a donor and travel through the entire process. So let's start with a donor entering a donation, and a new session ID is created on each page load with that code. From there, what happens is all of the information on a form corresponds to these fields we pointed out. For example, first name and last name, email, phone, and so forth. So as you can see, the amount field goes over to the amount code, the honoree person, the honoree name, goes to an honoree name field. The first name and last name of the donor, the email address, and so forth all go to corresponding fields in something called an audit data table. What's going to happen is when you come back to the thank you form, to the thank you page, you're going to be tapping into this data straight out of the audit table. So each individual donation corresponds to a session ID and a pile of audit data from the form. So as you can see here, the option name, the session ID that ends in DBD, has the information that I just showed you. That's the data from one donation. The session above it that enters in 1D3 will have data from a different donation, and so forth. And so what's going to happen is we're going to be able to pull this data back once we make it all the way to PayPal and back. So here's how that happens. The donation form is entered, and then the WordPress server, your WordPress server, will store that data in a table called WP Seamless Donations Audit Table. And so that's available later when we come back. Once that's been done, the next step is it pulls some of that information, not a lot, but some of that information, including, again, the session ID, and sends that off to PayPal. PayPal does its stuff and sends that ID back along with a status indicator that says it's complete, which you get on your WordPress server. That's the IPN. That IPN comes into your WordPress server and then triggers a set of actions. One of the things it triggers is a lookup from that same audit table. So as you can see, the IDs still match. We're dealing with the session ID that ends in DBD. It takes the information in that audit table and uses that to build your donation custom post type, your donor custom post type, and your fund custom post type, and populate those individual tables as you do the transaction. So what's going to happen is that's how we make sure that what is actually entered at the beginning by the donor winds up in your tables at the end. And the next step that also happens is this is where we get to the point where we're populating a thank you page, because the thank you page takes that same session ID data. It's not pulling it from the custom post types. It's pulling it from that transaction. It's pulling it from the audit table, and it is generating that in a thank you page. Now the thing is that the shortcodes, they pull in the data given the entry field. So for example, in this case, Robert Bobbers is the honoree name, and the donor is first name. It pulls in the session ID, and it pulls in something called a nonce. Now what a nonce is a number used once, and it is designed to make sure that the form that sent the data is used to be connected to the form that displays the data. In other words, that somebody isn't getting in between those two things and hacking it. It's a security feature. And that means that you can't generate this page, this thank you page, and access data on the server without the session ID and the corresponding nonce. And that makes sure, again, that people can't go digging through your thing trying to spuriously generate thank you pages that give them information about your donors. All right, so let's move on. What happens next is we, at that point, ignore, from this point on, we ignore the audit table in terms of this particular transaction, this particular donation. So our net result is you've displayed a thank you page, and then the data has been populated into the donation custom post type, the donor custom post type, and the fund custom post type. And that is the ongoing living data that you can work with on into the future as you manage your donations. So now that you've looked at that, I'm going to take 2 minutes and talk about how to get the entry data from PHP, and then I'm going to go on and show you a few debugging techniques and how to actually build this in a demo. So for those of you who are programmers, now remember, you don't need to be a programmer to do this. You can go ahead and just use the shortcode, but if you want to get at the equivalent data from the shortcode, there is a function that you can use. It's a simple API call, seamless donations TYE for thank you enhanced, get donation entry. We know what a session ID is, and we know what an entry field is. All you do is you pass it the current session ID, which is that long number, and we pass it an entry field like last name or first name, and it executes. So for example, you would take a string, you would run this function, seamless donation tie get donation entry with a current session ID and last name, and it would populate it into a string that you could then do something with in your code. So one of the things you're going to do is how do you get the session ID? The best way to do is check to see whether the session ID was passed to the page with a get, assign the session ID value to the get, to the variable session ID, and then go ahead and pull the data, the donations data entry. And that's it. That's the entire programming capability that you need to get donation data. So let's move on to the next step, which is how to test and debug a thank you page. Now here's 3 things you need to know. We talked about nonces before, but I'm going to talk about them again. Nonces, which are called numbers used once, and I put ish on there because WordPress doesn't exactly use it once. It's a little unrewarding to try to dive into exactly why WordPress doesn't use it exactly once, but the point is that it's considered numbers used once, and for your purposes and for security purposes, that's good enough. So a nonce is used to verify that a form was submitted by an authorized user. Now again, if you don't understand this, I'm going to demonstrate it so it'll become really, really obvious really quickly exactly what that means. But to test it, you're going to need to disable the nonce check, because otherwise you're just going to get an error that says, I'm not there, or you're going to have to do a whole variety of transactions, which could be kind of a pain. So to avoid all of those transactions, there's a debug mode on the setting tab that makes it easier for you to customize your page. And again, in a minute, I'm going to show you the demo, but these are the 3 things you need to know. And debug mode is really simple. It's part of the settings page. All you need to do is go onto the settings page, turn on debug mode, and you'll be all set. And at that point, you're able to go and run your tests, customize your page, do your development of your web page, and when you really like it, you'll turn off debug mode and open it up for actual use. So there we are. Let's take a moment. I'm going to pause this while I bring up the demo site, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the demo, or show you how to use it in a demo. Okay, so here we are in Seamless Donations. The Thank You Enhanced plugin has been enabled and the license has been set up. We discussed that in a different video, so you can go ahead and watch the installation and setup video if you want at a later time, but it's installed here. Now what I'm going to do first though is I'm going to take you through a transaction that has not is not using the thank you redirect page. So I'm going to turn off this plugin first. So let's go to install plugins. Let's deactivate thank you enhanced. Let's go back to seamless donations and the thank you page. And as you can see, this is the standard thank you for donating page that has existed before seamless donations. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the log. So I'm going to delete the log for our purposes to start it fresh. We're in the thank you page with thank you enhanced turned off. I'm going to actually go to settings and put in my test PayPal address. So info facilitator at zats.com. I'm going to switch this to sandbox and save the settings. And we're now in sandbox mode. So when we come back to seamless donations and we come to any of our pages, we're in sandbox mode, which means we're actually just doing test stuff, which is the environment you want to be in when you're testing your donation. Okay, so let's do this pretty simply. Let's do a $5 donation in honor of, $5 donation in honor of, let's call it Jack Spratt. We're going to send an acknowledgement to Jack's kid, Jack Brat, and he's at brat@jack.com. The donor information is going to be, I don't know, let's make one up, Bill Spratt. Make it Bill Spratt. He's at bill@jack.com, and his number is 222-222-2222. And as you can probably figured out, I did not pre-come up with people's names before I started this. So, and I'm still logged in as admin, but let's go run the donation. So we run our donation, come into PayPal, doing our little login, we're doing our donation, we're returning to the store, and as you can see, we're on the same donation page, which is the sample page, and thank you for donating a thank you email, which is exactly what we expect from here. Thank you for donating, and so forth. Okay, so we have our donation and our donation page, but what we really want to do is we really want to be able to use that to customize this and make it look quite a bit better. So at this point, we're going to go over to donations, and I'm going to show you something that may seem a bit of a surprise. Notice that there are no records found, even though we completed a donation, no donors found, and no funds found. And the reason for this is really simple, and it makes a lot of sense once you think about it. If we come over here to settings, you'll see this. My PayPal IPN URL is training.dev and all of this stuff following it. That's because I'm running this on a local host. I'm running this on my Mac, on my development machine, and as a result, PayPal can't get back to this machine to give us an IPN. So it actually can't complete that transaction coming all the way back and populating the donations, donors, and funds fields. That's okay. One of the reasons I'm showing you this as a developer is to show you how you can still do the transaction development and test even when you're on a local host machine. Even if you're disconnected from the internet, you should be able to get most of the way through this to be able to test this thing out. That becomes really important as we move forward. So that's why there is no data there. And you can confirm that by looking over here in the log, and you'll notice that the donation transaction was started, but it did not come back. There's no IPN transaction returning from PayPal that's populating that stuff. That's okay because, again, that's by design. The IPN here, somehow PayPal would have to figure out where training.dev was and how to deal with it, which it can't because it's behind, my firewall on my local machine. So, okay, so let's now go ahead and enable the plugin for Thank You Enhanced. And let's go ahead, and it's been activated, so let's go ahead and create a new page. Let's go over to pages, Right now, all we have is the donation page. I'm going to add a new one, and I'll be creative and call this thank you page. And for the sake of it, let's write in thank you and update it. So if we come back here, actually let's add that to our menu. So let's go to Appearance, Menus, and grab the thank you page, add that to the menu, and save it. Come back to our 2013 themed space. And now we have a thank you page, a donation page, and a thank you page. This is the form, this is the thank you page. So the first thing we're going to want to do is grab this URL, copy it, because this is where we want to end up with our custom page. And we're going to go back to Seamless Donations. Let's go to the thank you page, and let's drop in that URL. Now it turns out you could send people to Google if you wanted to, or Bing for some unknown reason. But really, you're going to probably want to send people to your thank you page. So when a transaction completes, they're going to come to the thank you page. So let's go back in and edit that page. Edit page. And just so that we know that's what we're dealing with, we'll switch to visual. And let's see. Let's make that a heading 1. And for kicks, let's make that a nice green. And just say update. So we now have this updated. Let's go ahead and do another sort of fake transaction, and you can see that we're redirecting to this page. So let's go back to the training site, go to the donation page. I'm not going to bother with all of these things because we're not populating anything at this point. Bill, Bob, Billy, Bob at bill.com, 222-222-2222. Hit donate. I'm going to run us through the PayPal sequence again. Donate. Return to test. Now watch. See, we're now on the thank you page. It's now the customized thank you page. So you could just limit it at that, but the thing that we want to do is look at more detail on how this works. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do is show you this URL, because this is what becomes really important. So, in fact, I'm going to grab this. I'm going to open up PowerPoint. I'm going to take us out of slideshow mode, come down to the end here. Let's create a new slide. And let's just make it just use the title, because all we're doing is really putting the URL in there. Okay, so what I wanted to do is take you through this URL for a second so you can kind of see what's going on. This is the main page URL, so let's just break that out onto a page. This is the page it's returning to. This is the customized thank you page that it's returning. The thanks equals true says that the thanks has worked. This is the session ID. Remember we talked about the session ID? So let's drop this down here. And let's do the same with this. I'm just going to make it wider so you can see it. I'll make it a little smaller. Okay, so now you're beginning to see what's coming back. You're seeing a session ID, which we talked about quite a bit, and then this nonce. So watch what happens if I go to this URL, taking the session ID. I'm going to come back to the thank you page, but this time I'm going to go to the URL without the nonce. So far, so good, right? It still says thank you. But what happens when we start to add data to this? Because this page doesn't have any data. So let's go ahead and add some simple data to this particular session ID. Let's go ahead and simply add one of those shortcodes. So seamless donations entry field equals last name. Simple shortcode to display the last name. Let's update the page, view the page, and hit refresh. Oops, actually paste in that session ID. Okay, now what you can see is you're getting a thank you page, and then you're getting access denied, because at that point you're asking Seamless Donations to go into the transaction database and pull some data out. And because we don't have a nonce associated with it, because we just have the session, it fails. And so we could have this fail as we've added more and more things. If we were, for example, let's come back to this page again and edit it, and let's make it first name, update. Let's go back, oops, go grab that URL from here. Go back to that URL, and again, you're seeing access denied. So the problem with this, of course, is if you're trying to develop a page and you want to tweak it and go over and over and make changes over and over again, you're going to get all of these access denied all the time. That's what debug mode is for. So let's switch over to our settings, come down here to debug mode, and enable debug mode. Now you're going to get two warnings. One is that you're in sandbox mode, and the other is that you're in debug mode. It's important to know both. Now let's, though, come back to our access page and hit refresh. Okay, well, that came as kind of a surprise to me, but it's good because we can look at how this sort of thing happens. I was fully expecting to show you the two fields, but it turns out that's not the case. And the reason for that is that I used entry field of first name and last name. And if you recall, let's go back to the thank you page. These are the fields, and you'll notice they're all capitalized. So if I go ahead and grab first name here and go back to the pages and edit the thank you page, and let's just put in first name, and then I'll type out last name and update. All right, let's go back to our thank you page, and let's hit return now. And there you go, you can see Bill and Bob. That's because the actual codes are case sensitive in the entry field. You have to get the exact entry field. And I'm kind of glad that we ran into that snag so that you could see how it behaves. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to settings, the seamless donation settings. I'm going to turn off debug mode. I'm going to come back up to that same URL and hit return. Now it has access denied. If I come back to debug mode and enable it and take you back here, you then get your full thank you page with what you want to show. So that's why debug mode is there, because otherwise you're going to get, the access denied issue for things where they don't have a working nonce. So let's take this one step further. Let's go back to our log. And you notice we have a whole pile of refreshes here, but I'm going to go all the way back to the first session because we entered a lot of good information. And I'm going to grab that session ID, copy it, and hopefully let's do a quick test over here. Just give us an extra line or two. Yep, so we notice we have a different session ID. This session ID is different from that session ID. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually create that nice thank you page we want to display. So I'm going to come in here and edit the page. Now, unlike my previous example, I actually have thought this through a little bit. So I'm going to grab some nice paste-in text. I'll make this all paragraph, and we'll paste in. So this is what we really want it to show. We want to say, thank you, donor, for your generous donation in honor of your honoree, and so forth. And let's come back. Let's grab this URL, but let's change this session ID out because we have more information from that other one. So let's use this, grab this URL, check to make sure we're still in Sandbox and still in Debug. So we can come into this page, paste it in, and as you see right now, it's going to say, thank you, donor, for your generous donation in honor of an amount. So what we want to do now is we want over here, let's go to the thank you page. And what we're going to want is say donor. So let's grab the donor's first name, come in here and edit the page. So we're going to want seamless donations entry field equals first name and end it. For your generous donation, let's go grab the honoree. In this case, we're looking at the honoree. Now, not all of these are going to be visible, obviously, because we're not grabbing addresses, but we want the honoree name. So let's come in here and seamless donations entry field equals honoree name in the amount of that. And let's play with this a little bit. Let's make all of this a bit bigger. So let's make all of this kind of a heading 4 level. And let's take this and see if we can make it a nice green. And let's take this and see if we can make it a nice green. And let's take this and see if we can make it a nice green. Okay, now let's update. And we'll come back to our page. Let's paste in our URL again. And there you go. Thank you, Bill, for your generous donation. Probably should be thank you, comma, Bill, comma. So let's come back over here again. Thank you, Bill, comma. Update. View page. Oops. View page with the details. So this is part of why we're looking at this debug mode. So let's go back to our page again. Edit page. Now let's center all that because that'll look nice. Update it. Come back to our test URL. And there you go. And you could customize this as much as you want. But as you can see, the ability to create a nice custom thank you page. I'm going to make that one that bigger just for kicks. Heading 4, let's bring that up to like a nice big old heading 2. Because you're really grateful and you really want to show people that you're grateful. So why not make it nice and big? There you go. So there you go. You can come back and you've got your nice, you could customize this with CSS or anything else you would normally do with your shortcodes and with the ability to do this. But remember that without debug mode and without knowing that ID, let's go back to settings. Let's turn off debug mode. Now let's come back to that same URL we've been testing. And as you can see, you get access denied. So the whole purpose of this trick, the whole purpose of having that debug mode and having the capability of doing that. Now, debug mode is also used in other parts of the plugin. But the purpose of that is so that you can keep making the tweaks that you want to make on the page you're editing, which is what I've been doing. I centered it, I changed the color, I moved things around, I made a few mistakes, all of that. That's what debug mode is meant to do, is to enable you to do that so that when it's time to actually do a real donation, and let's do that. Let's run through. We're not going to do a real donation in the sense that we're not going to be able to get back the PayPal confirmation, but we can cycle this through so you can do some testing and see how it works. So let's do that. Let's go back to our training site. Let's go to our donation page. Let's donate, instead of $5, let's make it $100. We're going to do another tribute gift in honor of you. And we're going to say the email name and email address. Let's just call it, let's do Jack again, jack@sprat.com, and whoops, Jack Sprat, and your name is Jane Doe. Email janedoe@rayme.com, and our 222-222-222. So we'll run this cycle, take it up through PayPal, donate the $100, return to test facilitator, and look at that. See, now you come back and you've got a really nice thank you page. It says, thank you, Jane, for your generous donation in honor of you in the amount of $100. And that is how you go ahead and customize this stuff and test it. Now you'll notice, once again, let's come back up here. This time, see there's a nonce up there? That's the, let's grab that URL again. Let's grab the whole thing. And now you can see, for example, that we have a new session ID and a nonce. And that's what happens with the system when you're doing it. Now, the thing is, you want to be really careful, because if we come back to the actual site itself, we're still in debug mode. That's why this thing is here. You want to make sure the debug mode is off, so that if a stranger comes on into that page, you don't run into a situation. Like we can't come in here and grab just this now. Debug mode is off. So we can come to this page and we get access denied. Now if we grab the nonce, because we know what the nonce is in this case, we can come back and we get the full amount, because that's, so see, this is why it's not quite number used once, it's number used once per transaction, but it still holds enough so that somebody can't come in here and start typing in a whole bunch of numbers and they'd have to get both the session ID and the nonce correct to be able to get everything working. So that's the full demo of this thing in action, as well as being able to go in and test it and tweak it. And there you go. Make sure when you're done, make sure when you go live, you turn off the sandbox and you turn off debug mode. Remember that you can go to the thank you page and all of your codes are here. Remember that all your codes need to be in uppercase or you will get an access denied error, as I did, which might be a little bit of a surprise. And remember that if you have debug mode on, you can go in and change as much as you want and edit it and make it look good so that you have the very best looking thank you page you possibly can. There you go. Oh, one last thing I want to tell you is if you go off-site, for example, if this page leads you away from the current site, obviously those shortcodes won't work. So if you take it to somebody else's site and you're expecting to use the shortcodes, they're not going to be able to pull it out of the database, which is on your site. So make sure you're using the shortcodes right on your site. That's it. My name is David Gewirtz, and I thank you for listening. Bye-bye.